Thank you all for coming. And I think it's for us Burundian, this is a very, very important day. It's an important day because after 4 decades, Burundians has closed themselves in the closet, hiding, feel ashamed for their past and for their history. But today, we come out from the closet with pride to commemorate our collective history. Before going forward with the program, I'd like to thank the ambassador for his support and the Holocaust Center for the inspiration and the support for this event. In this place dedicated to the Holocaust of Jews, it is necessary to recollect ourselves, to come back to ourselves, and to know that Jews did not deserve the fate they have savagely suffered, that the Armenians did not deserve the fate they suffered cruelly, that the Hutus and Tutsis of Rwanda did not deserve either to be exterminated, and that the Hutus of Burundi did not deserve the unspeakable atrocity of which they were subjected to. Honorable Senator Kruger, these are indeed very horrible words spoken by experts. How can this go unnoticed? What are the motives? What are the reasons? That's today what the senator we're going to discuss with us, because many of us have spent 40 years trying to wonder what happened, why the whole world didn't see us, why the whole world did not react. If you look in the history perspective, we're just coming out from the World War, where America came out victoriously, where we've experienced the horrible, horrible Holocaust. And yet, 300,000 people were murdered. Cables from the embassy in Burundi speaks for themselves. The Nixon transcript spoke for themselves. What went wrong?
Even before, when I remember so well, when I flew in, to the airport, and as I was being driven into the city, I saw these high hills going out from each side of the main road. And they were, I say hills, they were just, it was like an embankment about as high as the ceiling, up and down. And I said, what are those? I said, oh, those are the graves of some 200,000 people who had been killed in the genocide in the 1970s. And this was not obviously all 200,000, but it was 20 or 30,000 from what they said. And there were no graves, there were no tombstones. There was just a bit of grass on the dirt and these two gigantic things going out from each side of the road. And I thought, nobody told me about that when I was back in Washington. But there was the site of those graves. As we know, some 200,000 to 300,000 people were killed there. The estimate is that probably 8% of the population of Burundi was killed in a matter of a couple of months. The situations in 1972 and 1994 were different, but there are a lot of similarities in what was going on. It wasn't as bad when I was there in 94, but to say it's not as bad if only 100 people a day are killed instead of 10,000 doesn't make it good. And it was what I saw over and over about the circumstances. The conditions of the Hutu versus the Tutsi in the mid-90s were, even when I was there, but obviously far worse in 72 than in 94. Limits on education, because even when I was there, The Tutsi population, which made up 10% roughly of the population, got 90% of the positions in schools. And almost all the school teachers were almost certain to have been Tutsi. So you had a complete inversion. 10% of the population gets 90% of the spaces. 90% of the population gets 10% of the spaces. And the difference was Tutsi versus Hutu. This was true in the schools. It was tended to be true in the churches. It was true in political representation. And of course, there was one difference in the army because it was 100% Tutsi. You know, the people who were doing the killing all had to be in that group. And they were the army was doing the massive amount of killing during my time there. In conclusion, I think we should ask ourselves always, where do our obligations to others begin and end? Do we in fact have an obligation to humanity? And if we do have an obligation to all human life, if we want to try to recognize that all people are brothers and sisters, then where and what do we do when they are being cruelly attacked, when they're being sliced, when they're being denied? How do we address that? Do we just ignore it? Or do we come in and try to use various pressures? Or do we, if necessary, enter militarily? We cannot undo the past, but we certainly can help to shape the future. I have no authority to speak for my country or for yours regarding where our obligations to others begin and end. But I do think that we need to consider together, can we on this small planet create a global society that will address seriously the ideas presented in, by no means always fulfilled, but the ideas presented in Declaration of Independence of 1776. That is, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they're endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, and that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Today, that is more than just an American question for Americans. It is a global question. And all of us as citizens on this planet, all of us who share this planet, need to consider those things together. And I appreciate your inviting me to give my perspective on that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Senator. Before we start the questions, you finished by quoting your constitution. All men are created equal. You touched about the obligations to humanity. And in that perspective, I recall as well that in 1948, that's where the UN voted for the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Still, for me as a Burundian, or maybe for others, we still cannot apprehend why just after the declaration, almost 20 years or 15 years, to the ideals of the United States, the winner of the World War, if you may say so, and still the carnage which happened to Burundi was not even equaled. Of course, in the US, there has been some discussions, but I want to ask you to take us in the corridors of power. You've been in the Congress, you've been in the Senate, possibly you've exchanged with the other profile people. Tell us what could have gone wrong. Because if I went in digging into the archives of State Department, and I find one of the very interesting materials here. One meeting in the National Security Council, Mr. Melvin Levin wrote to Henry Kissinger and about what Senator Kennedy wrote. Kennedy used the tragedy in Burundi to accuse the administration of suppressing information on events in Burundi. And Melvin is arguing, telling the Kissinger that we have to do something because the slaughter is systematic and extensive and probably involving upward 100,000 victims. There are strong humanitarian reasons trying to halt it. We have to halt it. Otherwise, he will continue criticizing. And if you go on and on, you find, for example, in Nixon tapes, the Bush the father, explaining to Nixon that no, they are Burundians eating each other. Up to 200 of them digested each other, and there is no the slightest word in the UN about it. What you said, silence about the UN. And we go on. You see, Kissinger said, yeah, you will think with all the bleeding hearts in the country, there is nobody who can do something about it. They have killed every male of every family that has any education at all, grammar school, the Hulus. He didn't know that we were Hutus. Yeah? He said Hulus, and the Bush said Hutus. You know, and if you go on somewhere, Nixon comes back and said, I have been hearing about Burundi for a long time. Heard about it in the Senate. And he asks, how do they do it to kill each other? And Kissinger replied, they go around to the villages and shoot them or take bayonet to kill them. And Nixon answers, he said, good, good. And at the end, I want to have action about it. And still this conversation goes around and nobody does anything. How can this happen? I know you don't have an answer for that, but share with us how it goes around in the corridors of power, what they see the atrocities, which certainly also US is not a stranger on.
We certainly see an example of this today, in which, in my judgment, we have the worst president in the history of the United States. But we have, right now, particularly in our politics, I think it's worse now than it was even 20 or 30 years ago. People are getting their information in tweets and little things and snaps like that. And the sense of a larger encompassing humanity tends to be fading away. But there is always the question, I mean, particularly after Vietnam, which was not what, and nobody was happy with Vietnam at the end. The American people looked back and they said, well, in theory we were going in there to save Vietnam for democracy, but we lost 50,000 plus lives of Americans, and we still didn't wind up with democracy there. And there's still rivalries going on. And I'm not defending it, but it's the question for, a person in office has to, as a matter of principle, I think, feel that as a matter of principle we do have an obligation, and that obligation may include our sending our own troops and risking American lives to save the lives of others. But just as there would probably be, presumably some Burundians who would not want to risk their lives for Americans, there are going to be Americans who don't want to risk their lives for Burundians. And those are, the decision to send in troops at any point means you're preparing to put to death some of your own people, because you're not going to have no casualties at all. And so that is the calculus. If they look only at their own voters, they won't do it. If they will look sufficiently into obligations on a world scale, then they can. But it's also a lot easier if the United Nations as a whole will do it, because then the commitment of just American troops is not as large, and also it becomes an international undertaking. And I think we are closer today than we were 50 years ago, but we certainly are not there yet, and I'm not pretending they're there. But that is the political reality as I see it, that you don't win votes at home by sending your troops overseas, some of them getting killed. And so even if there are a few killed, they'll say, well, it's very expensive, why do we have to do this? But I'm not defending it, but I think that's what the political figures are up against. And so Bill Clinton sent in some troops in Somalia, I think, and they didn't do too well, or we lost some troops, and he pulled out, and he was very cautious about sending troops overseas again. And I think Obama was cautious too. But I think that's what it comes down to. Is it is why I think it's so important that the United Nations should try to do that, because then it involves countries from all over, which means a much smaller commitment of any particular country to the defense of others. And the United Nations is a clumsy organization too, and in some cases you would have there the Soviets and or China voting differently from the USA, because not in every instance, but you quite often did. And so the rivalries come in there between some of the so-called superpowers, in whom should we go out and try to defend. So there is no, I certainly cannot offer a simple answer. I'm not sure I can offer any answer, except that I feel personally, that the more the world can come, and I do think for all the problems that the world is nearer today than it was 100 years ago, or 300. I mean, 150 years ago we still had slavery in the USA. So, and the last president we had was African American. It took 150 years, but we got there. And we got there ahead of Europe pretty well, among other things. So I'm not. So it's, societies change much more slowly than we think they should, and that's. I'm not defending it, but that would be my explanation, as near as I could come.
If I follow up on that question, there is the fact that you say that is not that easy to intervene, because it demands a lot of diplomacy, a lot of calculus, political calculus. But one thing is to get involved, sending troops. But now we have all evidence, we have all cables, which is at our disposal now. We have a lot of, let's say, lecturers, a lot of people who have researched on the 1972 massacres. Why today is not accepted as a genocide, recognized and accepted as genocide? Because we have the data. We know, as you said, where there are mass graves. There has been evidences. Why it took so long time? And why do you choose one to be a genocide, another one to be forgotten?
I think what it would take is a broad enough support in the United Nations. But for anyone, I mean, for the head of any country, it's still a challenge to send in troops, because you know that you're sending some of your own citizens to death. You know that some are going to die. And so you are telling the people of your own country, we in this country need to have some people die for somebody in a country that you don't even know the whereabouts of. I'm not saying that if we accept the idea of all people being equal and of all being part of the brotherhood of man, then we ought to be ready to do it. But how many people are fully at that point morally? I mean, probably if your son was, was here and about to be hit, and a stranger was over there who was going to be hit, you'd probably defend your son first. And so, because we tend to think in terms of concentric circles, family is our first circle, and then perhaps our particular religion or our race or whatever else, and our nationality, and we reach out. And that idea of broader universal brotherhood is one that we haven't achieved yet. But we got a lot closer in the 20th century than we'd ever been before. And I think the 21st century we're still advancing. I think that more and more I don't think we're likely to have any large conflagrations left. And I think probably the quantity of genocides is declining. And I won't say it's ended, but I think it takes that kind of international pressure. Another thing that benefits us today is the immediacy of news. I mean, it's one thing to read in a newspaper 2 weeks later, 800 people are killed. But I know from my experience, I've seen it all. I've seen it directly. I can remember going to the Burundians will know, the Monument to National Unity. I went up there when there were some people who were having to flee a particular area, and I went up there, and here was a 5-year-old boy, and forgive me for being graphic, but they had chopped his head, split it open with an axe, and then they cut off his penis and his balls in cruelty. And that was what I was looking at. And I thought, my gosh, what can I do? Well, all that I knew that I could do was to go there, and they weren't going to do it in my presence. But it's just, it does not end in a day. And I'm not saying it can't end, but I think we all have to be willing to reach out, and we have to be willing to take some risks of our own. We can't just complain that other people don't take risks. We have to be willing to do that too. And that isn't a clear answer, because I think there are no simple answers.
Thank you.
Mr. Ambassador of Burundi, Mr. Ambassador on Senator from United States. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your invitation. My wife and I arrived in Burundi in August 1965. Anna Karin, my wife, is here, was a trained nurse, and I have studied science at the university. I was appointed headmaster, and Anna Karin became the school nurse. In the spring of 1972, an armed officer entered the church and asked the Reverend Abenego Madengo to give him the permission to deliver an important message. It had never happened before that an officer that interrupted a service. Apparently, it was difficult to refuse. One soldier came home to me immediately after and reached me a requisition from the army, as they needed to borrow the lorry of the school. Our lorry driver was to go with the loan. Some hours later, 2 of the national teachers of our school were arrested. Some days later, another 6 teachers were arrested, among them the secretary of the school, Notore Erast, a very good collaborator. They were transported on a lorry, and on the door of the lorry was written, French Technical Assistance, Assistance Technique Française. Terrible. I saw it. I was there. I was there. I followed him. I followed my secretary. Well, he was a man of God. Even this lorry had been for the special service of the evil. In the following night, about 30 pupils fled from the school. 4 or 5 of them were arrested. Saturday, May 20, 1972. In the primary school, 5 teachers were arrested. The military went on to our school, École Normale de Kiremba. I was always present. I was there. A soldier came forward and started to call names of pupils. I protested and said that the commander had told us that pupils should not be arrested. But he didn't listen to me and went on. 12 of the 16 pupils in the class were arrested. 12. In total 53 pupils, most of them from the upper secondary school. A military lorry came forward and the pupils were demanded to immediately climb up on the loading platform, and so they left the school. On the following day, Tuesday, May 23, a representative of the court in Burundi came to the school and wanted to see the pupils. He brought a paper and started to read names of pupils who were demanded to go directly to the lorry of the school. I tell you that among these pupils was the sister of the chauffeur. Armed soldiers who were hidden in the grass and among the trees came forward. A total of 74 pupils were arrested. 74. When they left the school, they pointed towards the heaven. They knew what would happen. This is difficult for me to read. I tell you. I feel hard here, difficulties, but I will do it. I will continue. Together with a teacher, I followed the lorry to Burundi to protest. But the soldier came forward and told us to disappear, or I will shoot. We had no choice. A total of 127 of the pupils were arrested. 127. Together with 8 national teachers. 51 pupils fled from the school. Of the 332 pupils we had at the beginning of the school year, there were only 154 at the end of the school year. That is only 46%. A terrible loss. The whole country had been the victim of the genocide.
I want to clarify the rules of the questions. We don't want political statement here. It's a commemoration. Of course, we invited all the people, all public to come to join us to mourn, but we want this to be a sober moment where we remember when we ask questions of collective interest to understand what happened in order to prevent such a thing to happen in the future. Please do consider these rules of the meeting. We don't want any political statement. I repeat again, we don't want any political statement. This is a time to mourn. This is a time to collect ourselves. This is a time to understand, to ask the questions. I know there is no answers for those questions. I know we have a lot of questions. I know we wonder about a lot of things. I know politics and the social life are interconnected, and I want us to be more resilient, to be more understanding, not to mix up.
We Burundians, we have a lot problem to understand. My question is related to Ambassador here. It is clear that Hutus in Burundi underwent a genocide. Are there reasons that genocide is not recognized by the United Nations organization? If slaughters are recognized as a genocide in accordance with the 1938 Convention of Geneva, why United is not recognized it until now after 35 years? There is other problem. What went bad to be recognized as a genocide in our country? Thank you.
People don't want to say genocide because if genocide is, if the government accepts it as genocide, then they have to do something about it. That's why they were so angry with me. My government, my government was not quite as angry with me as Kagame, but they were very angry because I was using the word genocide, which was true, and I was taking risks which they didn't want me to take, not because they loved me, but because they would be blamed if I got killed. And they were worried about their own skin. But the country is hesitant to use the word genocide because then something must be done. And that's why the United Nations, and of course there it has to get through the Security Council, which has 5 votes, and so the Soviet Union and the US don't always vote similarly. And so the genocide, I agree with you, it is real, it is awful, it is horrendous. We have seen it firsthand. I didn't mention, by the way, that my good friend Prosper, whom I saw alive last in 1993, he was killed around 2000 by forces in Burundi. But the fact of the word genocide requires a nation to do something through the United Nations, and they are reluctant to do that. And they're just hesitant because it is somebody else that is suffering. And until humanity is willing to say, if you suffer, I suffer. If you suffer, she suffers. We all suffer together. Until we are willing to say that, we are not willing to do something about it. It is only when we recognize that we all suffer, if others suffer and we do nothing about it. And that takes a moral change that I think we are developing towards. We are nearer now than we were 30 years ago, nearer now than we were 300 years ago, but we are not there where we need to be as yet.
As a missionary in Burundi,
Yes.
you saw what you saw. And you were sent by the church, the Pentecost church.
Yes.
And now we come out and they tell the truth. Pentecost church support us, back up our story because there is some record on that. My question to the senator is, as well, it's an honor to have you here. But my question is that if you see what's happening in the Great Lakes, do you see any connection between what happened in 1972 and what's happening, for example, in Congo? Because we have some 5 million people killed in Congo. We have some killed as well in Rwanda and Burundi. But do you see any connection? Is it a continuity? So what will you do, or what the United States is doing, or what the state is doing to stop that? Because are we going to wait 50 years to talk about Congo?
During the Second World War, the Jews, they were 5 million or 6, and so on. So this is an international problem, the problems of ethnical problems, yes. And I can tell you, we regret that this problem exists. But, We can't resolve it. We know there is one possibility, and it is, I would say, the Christ.
Now that the sons and the daughters of the victims of 1972 genocide are starting to fight for their right to mourn and to be recognized,
Yes.
will the church, Pentecost, give a testimony or support this noble cause? Because we understand that Burundians for you are the same.
Yes.
Even for us, Burundians, when a human life is lost, we all lose. That one we agree. But here we're trying to ask, could the church be brave enough and speak the truth?
We can't tell them that you have to say this or this in different questions. And the churches, I speak about the Pentecostal churches, has always tried to, they are independent of us in Sweden. We can help them. We can work there. We give them support.
Thank you.
Excuse me, but that is what we are seeing as churches in Sweden. We can't we can't start with a political message that you understand me.
Yes,
that
yes.
is not possible.
Yes.
That is not possible. And we have confidence. We have confidence at you, Burundis. You can resolve it.
What we find is that attitudes which have existed for far too long of separation between people within Burundi have recurred. And there's no question that, the genocide in 72 was broader than it was. It was more extensive than it was in the 90s. But the genocide again in 94, 95, when I was there, was, bluntly put, it was Tutsi killing Hutu. And it was the army that consistently did it. I mean, there were others too. As I said, the Hutu students who were children of my friend Marcien were telling me that they would have to turn because there would be sans échec and sans défaite, Tutsi youths who would be there with knives who very well would have killed them. They've had a number of close shaves of their own, very, very close encounters. And I'm awfully glad that they're, in my country now and doing well. But there's no doubt that what I was seeing there was Tutsi, and particularly the army, killing Hutus. And, I was not insulted by it, but there were certainly newspapers who called me a Hutu because I was so considered so much a supporter of them, and these would be Tutsi newspapers. So yes, I think there's a strong similarity, a strong continuance, but the quantity of killing was not as great.
My name is Arne Sylta. I come from Bergen in Norway, and I'm the chairman of the board in Hauge Umurjango Microfinance in Kiremba. And when we are there, I always ask these questions. What about the history? What about, is there any difference now or problems between Hutu and Tutsi? Everywhere and always they say there is no problem anymore. They say that we sit together in the churches. We have forgiven each other. We work together, and we are in government together. So we love each other. So there is no problem. And this is the starting point, we believe, for a new time for Burundi. So I just want you to know that. We read that there is problems, and I was there even now in March, just 1 month ago, and people say that this is a new beginning. So there is hope. But we cannot forget the history, what is behind. That's very, very important. So that's why I always need to know what caused the problems between the Hutus and Tutsis. We didn't get this answer here. I want to hear it in public. What caused this problem? And when you say, Henry, that this was not a question. You didn't even know who was a Hutu or a Tutsi. I want to know, in Kiramba, did people live side by side, and did they act like good neighbors to each other? Was there no division between them? That's interesting for us since we are located in Kiramba.
You asked to know where this division started.
Yes.
There are many people here who can give the answer, but I won't say it short before we move to another question. I think I believe in human beings, not ethnic groups. But I think, as Ambassador said it in his introduction, it's all started with divide and conquer. You have Belgium, which has its own problems, divided nation, came to Burundi, and a beautiful woman gave what she got. And then what she could do is to divide Burundians so that they can rule them. Basically, finding features. I will recommend you to go down here in the museum. You look at what they have as pictures. And when I was here, I was reminded by the pictures where the Nazis were measuring the nose of the Jews, the heads, and the mouth and the ears, to be able to find that Jews are different to other Germans. And that story just struck my mind that what we had here and there, because there is no very consistent and coherent history of Burundi. Everybody, talks about the history of Burundi the way they find fit for them. And those stories of dividing, they're all the same. Anthropologists from Belgium came to Burundi, measured noses and height, say, you tall, you might be good like me, like the senator said. So, you Tutsi, and you Hutu because you're this way. And came other subgroups like Baganwa, etc. But basically, if you look at the Bible, if you look at humankind, so we're all human beings. Of course, there are people look differently in many other cultures and nationalities. People look differently, but they're the same. In Norway, we know there are Samis and the rest of us. But what's so interesting, I will ask the same question. When Europeans or Norwegians talk about Burundians, they always ask, which tribe are you? Or an African, or are you Sunni or Shia? But when they talked about themselves, I never heard anybody say, are you Sami or Norwegian? And because we know there is a difference. And that's why Samis have their own parliament. They have their own culture. And you can see that this collective mindset from Norway never been a colony, never colonized anybody. But they've been as well colonized by Swedes 400 years and Danish 200 years. You tend to see other people in groups. So to divide and conquer because you feel they're under you. And the same, Norwegians, they find it very nice, very natural to call themselves Norwegians without divisions, even though they are divisions, which we know. But when it comes to us, of course it's very important to know that there are Hutus and Tutsis. So I think it's a more complicated and complex than what I suggest. In summary, it's just fabrication of people to divide. But basically, I don't see any difference between Tutsi and Hutu. We're all Burundians, after all, So because we've believed in those differences and people enhance them in such a way that it have become our normal lives. So that's how it is.
With what I've been hearing here, I sense that there's a lot of hurt, open wound, that takes me back to where I come from, the days of apartheid. And we come from not the same situation, but almost the same. where we were treated bad as a black nation or a non-white nation. But after 1994, we decided to say South Africa belongs to all, irrespective of color, creed, or race. We had to find it within ourselves, forgiveness. And we didn't know that it exists. We had thought an eye for an eye will do it. And we realized that it didn't. There is power in forgiveness. And each one of us has it within. The moment you allow it to say, look, let bygones be bygones, you can't change the past, but you can change the future, especially for the next generations to come. It won't take overnight, but a journey of 1,000 miles starts with the first step. So the moment we can just begin to teach that, that's what we went through. And I'm quite delighted that Burundi is starting to go through the TRC. Because yes, as much as you want to forgive, but at least you'll get closure at exactly what happened. You won't have answers for everything, but the fact that you just say, I forgive, irrespective of what, there will be that force that say, look, they took everything. But now, if you focus in the future, focus in the next generation, especially when you look back and say, I want my children, my great-grandchildren, the future to come, to live in peace and love, where tomorrow we say, oh, do you have this, like I say, a Zulu or Xhosa? I wouldn't know whether what mixture I am in me, but we are all human race. We all live in this global environment. I can't claim to be a South African. I can't claim to be from Burundi, but where I am, I make it a home. Because we're all human. We're all human. But what I can just edge you, because I can hear there's a lot of anger. I've been there. But I had to open up. I lived 18 years in exile, having been forced to go out and never had contact with my relatives. So I know how it is to live in anger. But it won't take us anywhere. The moment you open up and just say, let me find forgiveness within. It will be difficult, very, very difficult. But the fact that you have said it, you will get there. Thank you.
Yes, I'm called Rais. My question is for the ambassador. And I would like to know of course, you, with what you know and the talk you have been given here, so I would like to know what you're doing actually to promote this view to your government, because actually your government's never been for the Great Lake region, never supported anything positive there. So what are you doing actually to try to change actually this the situation, especially regarding the U.S. policy in the Great Lake region?
Right. Well,
second question, that is for all of us. I see that there is, especially for Burundi, there have been some up and down, but I'm sure that there is a lot of healing process going on. So how do you see the future, actually, especially for the Burundi? Because we need a lot of healing. It's not by only by initiative like the missionaries with whatever they are doing there, but the healing have to come from inside, because missionaries have been there also as an arm of colonialism and all of these things. So how do we see this healing?
Well, first of all, I'm 81 years old and I'm no longer in politics, so, but I'm still alive. But I'm no longer in office. I have written a book, which I'd be happy for you to buy, called From Bloodshed to Hope in Burundi, our years during the aspects of genocide in 1995. I certainly have not done anything personally, so let me be very candid about it. I have not done anything personally in the last few years specifically to direct that because not only am I out of office, but my party, the Democratic Party, is somewhat out of office.
But I think, like she said, that Excellency the Ambassador of South Africa, I think a journey starts with the first step. And I think now we've come out from the closet. We are talking, and that's what is the second segment where we're going to do testimonies. And she pointed out as well, we have the TRC, which is doing its job. And I guess the process of healing has started. We need to start somewhere. We need to believe in it. Like she said, we need to have all the time in mind forgiveness in order to move forward. I'd like to personally, on behalf of the group, to thank very much to Senator Kruger for making it come in here to share his experience and his wisdom, and especially reminding us all the time that forgiveness is the way to go. And thank you to Henry for your very moving story. And I believe the history, what you experience, we could see that it still marks you, as it is for us, which never had the opportunity to talk about it. And I think thank you very much for your support and for sharing. And thank you for the Excellency, the Ambassador of South Africa, who came to support us and remind us that in many ways, we have this similar situations, even though it's not the same. I'd like to remind everybody that after 72, Burundi experienced apartheid, which nobody talks about it. Hutus were never allowed to go study law, study medicine, study political science, study economics, and they were bound to do mechanical school. They were not allowed to be in a government. They were not allowed to be ambassadors. I mean, there were nothing for us. For young Hutus, there were no role models to see and to follow. It has been hard. It's like you're born, you see you don't have a dad, and the only relative you can see around is either mechanic somewhere in the street, and what else? It reminds me ghettos in US, you know. You're born, your dad is a pimp, and then you die a pimp. You know, it has been very, very, very hard situation in Burundi. But I believe, like the gentleman from Kiremba said, we've gone, we've taken off now. And Senator Kruger has put it in the book title. Now we have a hope. Burundi is changing, and we need to follow. We need to forgive, we need to talk about it, and move forward, because the future counts more than the past. Thank you very much.
Ego nkuko mwavyumvise, jewe nari muto cyane, nari mfise imyaka 6, nari mu mwaka wa mbere. Mbanje gushima ko iyi ntambwe ya mbere ibaye inyuma y'imyaka 45 amakungu araba uyu munsi turiko turavuga ivyo twabonye. Jewe nari mfise imyaka 6, twari mu ishure mu masaha 8:30, tubona abasoda batuguyemwo, baraza bafata umwarimu wacu, baramuboha amaboko imugongo, baramusohora, turakoma urwamo nk'abana murabyumva. Uwo mwarimu nibuka ikiganza adusezera, aho iruhande hariho umwarimu yatunga urutoki abandi, ariwe agenda arerekana abo batwara. Batwaye abarimu benshi 5, abo bose barabahutu. Niho directeur w'ishure arakoranya abanyeshure ababwira yuko aba bantu barabamenja. Ubwo baca bababoha bakabaterera mu ikamyo, barakoma induru, mugabo bakoma induru atawe bayiha. Ubwo nk'abana batonyi twaciye dushwiragira dutaha. Abakuze batirutse nabo nyene barapfuye mu makamyo, kandi nta numwe yigeze amenya iyo babahambye. Uyu munsi rero uri hejuru, dushima cyane intambwe tugeze ko, kuko dushobora kuvuga ukuri kw'ivyabaye. Aho kare ntivyashoboka. Jewe nize école primaire secondaire, mugabo ntitwashobora kuvuga ivyabaye. Ubivuze witwa umumenja uw'amacakubiri. Nashimye impanuro madame wo muri South Africa yaduhaye yo kubabariranira, ariko ntawubabarira umuntu icyaha atemera. K'uyu munsi ukuri umuntu ashobora kukuvuga, birakwiye yuko kubanza kwemegwa n'ivyo yakoze akavyemera, hanyuma akababarirwa. Iyi ni intango idasanzwe, kandi ntizosubira inyuma, kuko ukuri guca mu ziko ntigusha. Ababikoze turabazi, nk'abo bigishwa bafashwe, jewe ndaza babatwaye. Urumva ntawobabarira umuntu atemeye ikosa kandi yararikoze. N'ababikoze ubazi ndababona benshi n'abatama, ariko nibaza yuko bobanza kwemera ikosa hanyuma bakababarirwa. Uwapfuye ntazogaruka, mugabo ku mutima kirururuka. Nkahanura ugwaruka yuko nukuri twobandanya rugendo dutanguye. Murakoze.